according to how many there was to go.
Okay, we're ready.
Ready?
Yeah.
And when I was a boy on the farm over in Middle Tennessee, we were all farmers together. There were, every man made his own living. We planted everything we expected to eat, and my father never sold anything that couldn't walk except eggs. And we got 3 cents a dozen for them for a while. And I remember we sold hogs for $1.50 a hundred. And yet we had plenty to eat and plenty to wear. Now, we had a large farm, rough farm. The Lord hung it up to dry and forgot to take it in. And it's still hanging up over there. And we'd, during the summer season, every Saturday we'd kill an animal of some kind. Sometimes it's a goat, and sometimes a sheep, and sometimes a pig. But when Monday come, that is all eat up. What we didn't eat, our neighbors would come in, we'd divide with them. And they'd do the same thing. We had over in the hollow nearby, and joining us was an old rebel soldier. My father was an old Yankee soldier. Those old soldiers would get together and fix out their ticket every election and vote the same ticket. And those 2 farms voted 30 votes. And they carried the election for 12 years, the way those 2 farms went. Well, if Uncle Lee Foster killed an animal out of season, he'd never wash his hands, he'd bring Father a piece of it. Well, Father'd do the same thing to him. And Father'd go out in the spring of the year and hunt the poorest old steer he could find, and the biggest one. Well, he'd bring that old reeling animal home, and by the 1st of August, he was on full feed. Well, he just stood in the trough and ate from that till Jack Frost got him. Then Dad said to Uncle Lee one day, "I'm going to kill old grandson tomorrow. Come over and help me, and I'll give you a piece." He said, "Well, I'll come and help you, but I don't want any of that old steer. He looks too poor. You know, those old bony hips still sticking out." Well, he came, and dressing old grandson under the skin was a layer of yellow fat. And he said, "Zach, what's that?" He said, "That's fat, Uncle Lee. And when you take the hide off the steer lying on the ground. Then you horsed him. And then you dress him or hang him. And got inside of him, there's another layer of fat."
I've already written all this down for him. He's...
Okay, be just a second. Just
I
yet.
think...
Not yet, just a second. Okay, we're ready.
Ready?
Yeah.
When I was a boy, all we knew to cook was what we called a hog and hominy living. We made good cornbread and good biscuits and fried meat and things of that kind. But this newfangled food they're putting up today, all kind of salads and things of that kind, we didn't have that. Food is better today and better prepared than it was then. But we had more of it, but it was hog and hominy. Now, for instance, we come to the table, maybe there'd be 10 pounds of meat on the table, cooked, and it was well cooked. Nowadays, it's so good, they just give you a little piece, you can swallow it, about 2 bites. And that's, but our food today, we have better cooks now than we had. They're better trained cooks. But they go to the store to get it. And they've got cookbooks and everything to go by. When I was in college, I had a period that the class, well, they asked the teacher if I could join them. And they all thought it was a lark to get me to join the home ec class. Well, of course, I'd had some training in cooking too, and I followed the book. Whatever the book said, I followed it to the letter. Well, in the closing, they had a cake baking contest, cake baking, and I was one of the bakers. Well, I followed the book. Well, the girls all had a smattering of cooking from home, and they didn't follow the book too close, and I got the blue ribbon. And they never would let me join the class after that. I lost out.
Perfect. That's real.
Are we ready?
Not yet. Just a minute. Okay, we're ready.
When I was a boy, our houses were old-fashioned houses, and if we broke a window light out, we never put another in. And we'd just go to bed and we'd sleep 4 or 5 in the bed to keep each other warm. And electric blanket was unheard of. We'd have a fireplace and sit around that. But there was in our house, it was a big old rambling house. As our family grew, Dad kept building another room. And we had 4 or 5 different attachments to the house. But no, it was cold. We'd warm our belly, and then our back would be cold. Then we'd have to turn around and warm our back, and our belly would get cold. That is when cold winter weather. Well, in those days, we had lots of snow. We don't have so much snow anymore. On the 14th of February, I remember a 14-inch snow fell in one night. We had 75 head of turkeys up in the holler, and they wouldn't get out of the trees. We had to go up there and cut down a bushy tree and take an animal and snake it to the barn. The turkeys flew down and followed us to the barn, and we had turkeys all the rest of the winter in our way. But no, our houses back in those days were either log houses or framed houses, and they were made good and tight to begin with, but you take a bunch of kids, there are always some of them opening doors back and forth. There's hardly a door never stayed shut more than 5 minutes at a time. In our family, I don't know how it was in others, but no, and our cooking wasn't as wholesome as it is now. We have better cooks now than we had back in those days, but they've got more to cook. They couldn't go back and didn't have any cars. Oh, you're not ready yet?
Not yet, no. We're ready.
When I was a boy, we never didn't know anything about a car. All we had was a horse and buggy or a horseback. And any man that wants to go a-courting today, if he'd get him a little fat mule and a buggy, and get his girl in that buggy, he could lay the reins over the dashboard, and he could have all the loving he wanted. And that mule would know exactly where to take him. But today in a car, you've got to keep your eyes on the road, and your hands on the throttle. Well, I remember the first car came to town. It was a little Ford car, and I was young school teacher at Baxter, Tennessee. And a man superintendent of our Sunday school, he was a manufacturing man, made handles for sell to Mexico, funny handles. And he got a Ford car with butcher knife wheels on it. Well, he was superintendent of the Sunday school, but after he got that car, we had to get another superintendent, because Sunday morning he'd load up the whole family and light out somewhere, and it hurt our church. And I remember first car I ever owned, I was a pastor in Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, and I found a car down there, a Ford car with a national body on it, and a cute-looking car, and I bought it for $200. Well, the man I bought it from, he took me up the highway about 2 or 3 miles, showed me how to drive it, turned around and said, I got under the wheel. Brought me back to town and parked the car against the curb, and he got up and left. There I was in town with my car, didn't know how to get out. Well, finally I got turned around and by assistance from others, and started up the road, and a man and his wife was sitting up on the bank in their yard hollering at me. Well, I didn't know that a car followed your eye, And I started talking to him and just drove up in the front yard, knocked the fence down. I told him, send me the bill, and I'd pay it. And, well, we didn't have many cars, but there was a big doctor there, a rich doctor. He got him a Lincoln, and, oh, he was proud of that Lincoln. Well, I was making a call out about a mile from town, run up on the dock there with his car. I said, what's the trouble, doctor? He said, my car's gone dead. I said, you want me to pull you in? He said, have you got a rope? I said, I got a chain here. You know, back in those days, everybody carried a chain because you had to pull somebody in. And I got in front of his car, started slowly. He told me, he says, go in the back way. I said, No, and I drove him clear around the square, blowing my horn so everybody see that little old Ford of mine pulling a big Lincoln car. The doc said, if you ever get sick, I'm going to kill you.
I want to put some biscuits.
I can bet this woman with earphones on over here.
We're ready.
When I was a boy on the farm and a neighbor died, or a member of the family, why, we'd go sit up with them. I'd go sit all night. And I remember we had in the neighborhood an old hermit, and he had a little farm about a mile from ours, and on the hillside about was a big clearing. And Uncle Johnny died, a cold time. Ice was on the ground. It wasn't any snow, but it was awful cold. Well, we young people got together and decided we'd go set up with Uncle Johnny. And it was agreeable. There's about 12, 15 of us. Well, his kitchen was over about, it wasn't connected to the living room. The kitchen was about 10 steps off from the house. And when about, I guess an hour after dark or later, the men that was going to burn the brush, they went up there to set the brush piles afire and get ready for planting time. And they decided to go in to see about Uncle Johnny. Well, they got in, and the young people, we were all back in the kitchen, having a good time back there, and Uncle Johnny was in the front room by himself. Well, the men that took Uncle Johnny and put a pipe in his mouth, stood him up in the corner. He's on the bed. Well, when the young people, when we come back in, there stood Uncle Johnny with a pipe in his mouth, and we took off. And the men they didn't burn in the brush that night. They had to come in and set up with Uncle Johnny. And we set up, and we had one fellow by the name of Pete McGuffey. We were setting up with him. Well, Pete was mean. He was one of the meanest men I ever knew. And everybody was talking, can you think of anything good Pete ever did? And nobody could think of a good thing Pete had ever done. He'd been in jail about 90% of his life and fighting and killed 2 or 3 men. And we saw an old fellow come there, called him Dad Clemens. His hair was white as snow, hanging clear down to his shoulders. Well, someone said, if anybody can think of anything good, Dad can. So he came up and says, Uncle Dad, Pete's dead, and can you think of anything good he ever did? He said, yes. Says, he sent me across the river once in a canoe, and he whistled the prettiest tune I ever listened to while he set me across. Well, that is one thing Pete had done that we could brag on after that. He's a good whistler. But we'd set up, now so we didn't have any undertakers in those days, and we had to bury the people pretty quick after but one time, I remember a kid got a hold of some poison. You know, you could buy opium in those days and chop off what you wanted, raw opium. And he'd got a hold of too much of it, and he died. And then it started raining and couldn't bear him. Well, you know, it's hot weather, and we had to make our own casket, you know. He never bought any caskets, and there's always a good carpenter in the neighborhood that was an expert in making a casket. And so he bursted, and we couldn't get him in the casket. He